filmed. Oh, there we go.
We're good.
Good evening. At this time, I'd like to call to order the Fishers Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for February 22nd, 2023. I'd ask you to please rise and state our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Ferrucci.
Here.
Mr. Grinslade.
Here.
Mr. Sylvie.
Here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Here.
And Mr. Lannon is absent. Thank you.
We do have a quorum to conduct tonight's business. The first order of business is election of officers, appointments, and designations. Election of the chairperson. Do we have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson, I make a motion that we elect Steve Ferrucci as chairperson.
I second.
Do you actually call a roll, or is it
You can do all those in favor.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. The next is election of our vice chairperson, and I would like to make a motion for vice chair to be Howard Stevenson.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Appointment of secretaries, Megan Vuksevich, Ross Hillary, Bree King, Sydney Granlund, and Tyler Folk. All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry. Motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Appointment of recording secretary, Kate Prang and Kelly Lewick. Do you have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Designation of Plan Commission Legal Counsel, Krieg DeVault. Motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. And finally, designation of commission legal publications, Noblesville Times and the Current. Motion?
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Kay, did you get that? I did. Very good. You okay? You need a minute? Okay. All right. Next order of business is approval of the previous minutes from December 14th, 2022.
I move that we approve the minutes from December 14th, 2022.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Well, before we vote, Mr. Chairperson, I will abstain from voting on the minutes. I was not present for that December meeting shortly after the passing of my father.
Very good. We have one abstain, so all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, they've been approved. So we'll move into the public hearing. The first order of business is VA 22-32, 11142 Timberview Drive, front setback and garage setback. The request is to approve two development standards variances from sections 3.2.4B, .2a, and section 6.3.4B, 4A of the city's Unified Development Ordinance to allow a front setback of 25 feet and to allow a front-loaded garage to extend 4 feet in front of the front facade plane. The petitioner is John Cross on behalf of the property owners. Mr. Cross? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Cross. My address is 13 North State Street, Suite 241, Greenfield, Indiana, 46140. And I am here on this petition where the petitioner is requesting two variances, as stated, a front and back setback of 25 feet where 30 feet is required by ordinance, and also for the attached front loading garage to be built 4 feet in front of the front facade doorway of the home, where it is required to be built behind the front facade. Now, this neighborhood, Walnut Hills, was developed in the 90s, I believe 98, and at the time the ordinances were not in place with these requirements for which the variances are requested. The home since then was built in conformance to the HOA's covenants and restrictions. The plat dictates a 25-foot setback, so that is why it was built in that manner. Most recently, the home burned down in a fire. The lot is currently vacant, and the petitioner hired a builder to build a new home. They made the plans, they submitted them, and permitting denied them due to these two variances, along with another abnormality regarding the decorative garage, which the petitioner has agreed to install. So the requests for the two variances are in order to make this house consistent with the neighborhood. The neighborhood is relatively large. It's very nice. I drove through it this week, and a majority of the homes there all have front-loading garages that all extend in front of the front facade, if not even to it. I think I only counted maybe one handful worth where they were actually to the rear of the front facade. I do know that we have some members of the HOA in the neighborhood here tonight, so they might be more familiar with the number of homes in the area, but when I drove by, that is what I saw. So the purpose of this is really just to make this house consistent with the properties, so as not to lower this property value or use, or the nearby neighbor's property and use. The 25 foot front setback, that would be consistent with the neighbors in the neighborhood, as would the front loading garage to be 4 foot in front of it. The hardship here and the practical difficulty is that the house burnt down, not by design, but by accident, and they're just trying to build similar to what the rest of the neighborhood is and what the HOA would want to as well, which the HOA did already approve the plans that have been submitted. So all we need to move forward would be to have these two variances approved, and we don't believe that there would be any injury. Again, this would make it wholly consistent with the neighborhood. Disapproving the variances would have the opposite effect. It would make it inconsistent, which we think would have more of a detrimental value to this home and the properties around it than not approving. So with that said, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Any questions for Mr. Cross from the board? Staff?
Good evening, Megan Vukasich, Director of Planning and Zoning. I'm going to be presenting for Sydney Granlund tonight. So this variance request, as mentioned, is for the property at 11142 Timberview Drive. This is the condition of the property and aerial as it sits today. The house did burn down, so the lot is currently vacant. Here's the proposed site plan for the new home. This has been submitted for building permits, and our staff reviewed it for compliance and determined that there were two discrepancies with our code. One was the front building setback. It's required that the home be set back 30 feet from the front property line. However, as was mentioned, when this neighborhood was developed, it had a 25-foot front setback. Our zoning standards then changed, and so that's why it cannot comply with that front setback standard today. And then additionally, we have a new architectural requirement that garages be set back from that front building line. And in this case, they're wanting to keep the same character of the neighborhood, how it was built out, and have requested that the garage extend 4 feet in front of that front building setback. We have received no public comments at this time regarding the variance request, and staff is recommending approval to the board for both of these variances, for the front setback and for the front loaded garage extension. Should the board approve this petition, we recommend that it is done with the condition that the variance is recorded onto the property with the county. Happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Members of the board, any questions for Megan?
No, I'll just make a general comment. This is my former neighborhood in Walnut Hills when we first moved to Fishers in 1999, so I'm keenly aware of the neighborhood, and I presume our former house complied with that setback as well. So thanks for your presentation.
Thank you. At this time, I'd open the public hearing. If anyone is here from the public as to speak to this petition, I'd ask you to please approach the podium. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Do we have a motion from the board? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Please step forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, and I'm the neighbor front house and of this property, and my name is Nair Siddiqui. I've been living for 20 years in this neighborhood, and the problem I see that the first thing I welcome the new neighbor, and I like to see that, these 5 years this house is burned down, and there was nobody, there was nothing built on that. Problem I see that when you have a shorter driveway, then there's a tendency the cars will be maybe they are on the street which is narrow, and especially those are problem for those if the cars are parked both sides or even one side all the time, then there is a problem in moving. So that was a problem I see more. There is another safety issue which I saw that when the house got fire, my house is just in front of that. I was worried that if the fire start from garage, so it was just and I was thinking about my house is going to get too, but fortunately not. And I had a car in my driveway, which was also safe when I talked to firefighters. So that's what I'm worried. The more closer you get, if there is a fire in my house or his house or closer houses can get, the neighbors, those two houses on the other both sides got really burned also. The walls were burned. So I just want to see that there should be enough space as the code requires that. And I think the code really get more intelligent in increasing the distances so that people will be living more comfortably and people are not driving the car on the road. Thank you. That's what I had.
Thank you, sir. Members of the board, do we have any other questions for staff or for Mr. Cross? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve VA 22-32 on the conditions that's variances recorded with the county.
Okay, we do have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Grinslade,
Yes.
Mr. Sylvie,
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes, motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Cross. Our next order of business this evening is VA 23-2 13626 Haven Cove Lane Pool. This is a request to approve a development standards variance from section 3.2.3 of the city's Unified Development Ordinance to allow the lot's maximum impervious surface coverage to be 57%. The petitioner is Blair Lynch on behalf of the property owner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As was presented in the petitioner's packet, my name is Blair Lynch with Mermaid Pool Spa and Patio. I'm representing Matt and Shannon McCollum this evening. And as you can see, the existing pool and the constraints of the actual property don't really allow us any other location of where we're going to put the pool and where we would put the existing patio around the pool. So we're limited to the location of the pool. The homeowner had previously asked for an impervious surface increase from that 35% to the 50%. And at the time that he had requested that, that was approved with the knowledge that in the future, if he did decide to add a pool to this property, that he would have to ask for an additional impervious surface. That's what we're requesting here. Obviously, the reason why we have the amount of concrete or the patio space around it is just due to the location of the home and making sure that it's safe for the homeowners when they are walking around the patio deck. We just want to make sure it's safe for homeowners and guests when they're around that. We've also applied for an easement. That's been approved and recorded with Hamilton County. There is a 4-foot easement within to the, I think it's the rear setback. This on a personal note, the homeowners, this will be the third pool that I've put in for them. The first two pools were also here in Fishers as well, off 121st and Hoosier, and then the other one was actually just to the south of the property that they're building on, across from the reservoir. So they decided they're going to put a third pool in, and just for their family, and so we're requesting the additional 7% to allow for us to put this pool in.
Thank you, Mr. Blair.
Yep.
Do you have any questions from the board for the petitioner? Staff? This is the second.
Again, good evening. This is for variance at the property 13626 Haven Cove Lane. It is adjacent to the Citizens Reservoir, which is an extension of the Geist Reservoir. And you can see the aerial shown here. This property is highlighted in blue. It is not directly adjacent to the water. You can see there's a bit of a common area sliver, but it is adjacent to the water's edge. The proposed improvements are highlighted here in yellow. As was mentioned, this property did have a couple of variances approved in the past when the home was first built. And those two variances were approved in August of 2022 for the height of the primary structure as well as the impervious surface coverage of the home at that time. So this request is really an extension of that previous variance for additional impervious surface coverage for the pool decking as shown here. Here we can see the topography of the site where the blue arrow shows the direction of runoff, how that would flow. Most of the lot's runoff will flow directly north towards Citizens Reservoir, and the rest will flow south towards a storm drain in the street that takes the water across Haven Cove Lane to a storm pipe. The water would continue to flow south between lots 490 and 491 across the street until it reaches Geist Reservoir. Staff did discuss this proposal increase with Jason Armour, who is the city's stormwater engineer. He stated that there are no concerns regarding the project. The petitioner has also applied for a drainage easement permit, which is required for any encroachment into a drainage easement, and they are working closely with our stormwater team on that approval. But again, our stormwater team did not have any concerns with this increase in impervious surface coverage. We have not received any public comments at this time regarding this variance. And staff has no recommendation to the board for this impervious surface coverage increase. Again, that percentage that they're requesting is 57%. Should the board approve, we do recommend that it is done on the condition that the variance is recorded on the property with the county.
Thank you. Members of the board, any questions for staff?
I guess I have one question, Megan. How does this increase to 57% compare to, I guess, other lots in that community?
I would say it's on the high end of that impervious surface coverage. When you get close to 60%, that's when we start getting a little bit concerned. But of course, we ran this through Jason, our stormwater engineer, and he didn't have any concerns with that increase in coverage. So it's still within that allowance that we're comfortable with from a stormwater perspective, but it is on the high end on what we've approved in this neighborhood.
Thank you.
This time I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone is here from the public to speak to this petition, please approach the podium, state your name and address. Seeing no members of the public, I'll close the public hearing. Members of the board, do we have a motion?
I move that we approve VA 23-2 under the condition that the variance is recorded with the county.
I'll second that motion.
Secretary?
Mr. Grinslade.
Yes.
Mr. Sylvie.
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes, Mr. Lynch, it passes, and hopefully this will be the last time. Not that we don't like you coming here, but
I think we're done. They said there are 4 in the next house.
On this property.
on this front.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, our next order of business this evening is VA 23-3, 11668 Armada Court, front and aggregate setbacks. The request is to approve 2 development standard variances from sections 3.2.3.B2A and section 3.2.3.B2B of the city's Unified Development Ordinance to allow a front setback of 25 feet and to allow an aggregate setback of 23 feet. The petitioner is Adam Richter, the property owner. Mr. Richter?
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you. Apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold. Also, thanks to staff. They've been fantastic to work with and both knowledgeable and responsive, and their efforts have been really appreciated. So my wife, Jennifer, who's in the audience here tonight, and I have owned this house since 2006. A lot has changed in the last 17 years, not just with the house and improvements to that, but our family has grown, and we love it. We want to stay here. We love our neighborhood. We love our neighbors, but we need just a little bit more space, and that's what these improvements are all about. When the home was originally constructed in 1985 or maybe 1986, it was not subject to the current 40-foot UDO-based front setback 40 feet off of the public right-of-way. It was instead subject to a 25-foot setback was provided per the neighborhood's plat. We are proposing that the first improvement, which if you squint you can see the expansion of our current 2-car garage into a 3-car garage, that the additional garage bay would be expanded out into or up to the original 25-foot setback. Mr. Ferrucci, Ross provided you a document that I put together there that shows, yep, you've got it there. I think that is a document that I put together showing distances throughout Masthead and in an adjacent neighborhood, showing the distance from curbs back to the front of a home, intended to demonstrate that what we're asking for is consistent with how homes on my street, homes within my larger neighborhood, and then even homes in surrounding neighborhoods have been built in a way that is consistent with what we are proposing. The best example of that is there are 2 homes directly across the street that were built up to the 25-foot setback line. It's the last 2 homes that you see in that package there. So what we're proposing with respect to the garage is nothing more than what has already been built within our street, and is consistent with the design of both our street, the neighborhood, and the surrounding area. A similar story applies to the aggregate setbacks. We are proposing to remove a staircase that is located, let me see if I can zoom in on this here, on the back side of the garage. If you go where the diagram shows existing residence and just look immediately to the right, you'll see a set of steps there. We're proposing to remove that set of steps and put in a screened-in porch. So with the addition of the screened-in porch, the aggregate setback becomes 23 feet, which would have been in compliance with the 20-foot aggregate setback that was required by the original plat. Under the UDO, when we were annexed into Fishers, it became a 30-foot aggregate setback. The proposed improvements would not conform with that. So again, just asking permission to build out to the plat-based aggregate setback. So similar story with respect to the front and the back. We do have two neighbors to our east who would be impacted by this, the Keener family and the Vigran family. Both of them have provided in writing that they have no objection to the improvements. The Keener family is here tonight, and they've been wonderful neighbors for the 17 years that we've been in the home. The HOA has also approved this. They've seen the plan renderings, drawings, elevations. And I'll add one last thing, and then I should have mentioned this earlier. With respect to the side yard aggregate setbacks, I wanted to note that there is a substantial landscape barrier, which I've noted here. An area that I would consider heavily forested. It's trees and very towering trees and shrubs, low-lying shrubs that when it's not wintertime will block the view between the Keener's residence and our residence. There's currently a hardscape patio over there that will remain, and it's obscured from view. That is all I have to present.
Thank you, Mr. Richter. Members of the board, do we have any questions for Mr. Richter? Thank you. At this time, I'd ask staff to present.
Good evening. For the record, Ross Hillary, Assistant Director of Planning and Zoning. Before you tonight is BZA case VA 23-3, which is located at 11668 Armada Court. The property is located within the Masthead subdivision along Geist Road, north of Fall Creek Road. As was stated, this was developed in the mid-1980s with the plat recorded in 1984. The development of this area around Geist, including the Masthead subdivision, was under the city of Noblesville's purview at that time. The subject property is within the R2 zoning district, and as such, as a requirement, front setback of 40 feet to the primary structure and a required aggregate setback of 30 feet to the primary structure. A residential building permit was applied in January of 2023, and that's when our conversation started with the petitioner. The variance request for the development standard is from section 323B2A and 323B2B, which would allow for a front setback of 25 feet from the 40 foot to allow for a garage addition, and an aggregate setback of 23 feet from a 30 foot due to a proposed patio. Here's a site plan of the property with the proposed garage addition. You'll see here it's located in the front, would be approximately 25 feet from the property line. And then proposed screen porch, which is the second red square that he showed earlier. This would create the setback aggregate of 23 feet on both sides of the property. Here is the front elevation and east elevation where you can see the addition of the garage as well as the integration of the building materials. And the second elevation here is the rear and west elevation, which you can see the addition of the covered porch, also with its integration into the property. As was mentioned, the petitioner has received letters of support from two adjacent property owners located at 11704 and 11712, which are the two that are starred right here. The property in question tonight is the blue highlighted property. With that, staff has no recommendation for the Board of Zoning Appeals for these two variance requests. Should the board approve petitioner, the staff recommends that the condition of the variance is recorded on the property with the county. Happy to answer any questions.
Members of the board, any questions for Ross? No. Okay, thank you, Ross. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone is here from the public, please approach the podium and state your name and address. The neighbors like to speak at all on this? No? Okay. I'll close the public hearing. Members of the board?
I'll make a motion that we approve VA-23-3 with the condition that the variance is recorded on the property with the county.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Mr. Grinsley.
Yes.
Mr. Sylvie. Excuse
Yes.
me. Mr. Stevenson
Yes.
and Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes, motion is passes. Mr. Richter, good luck to you. Thank you. Okay. Our final order of business this evening is 10746 Haven Cove Way, front setback and second dwelling unit. This is a request to approve a development standards variances from section 4A1 of the Marina Planned Development to allow a front setback of 16 feet and to approve a land use variance from section 515 of the city's Unified Development Ordinance to allow 2 dwelling units in a single primary structure. The petitioner is David Gilman, and on behalf of the property owner. Mr. Gilman?
Hi. Good evening. Thank you. My name is David Gilman. My offices are at 211 South Ritter Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana 46219. My client is Marjack Holdings. Marjack Holdings has purchased 2 lots in the Cambridge development, and they have replatted those 2 lots into one large single-family lot, and I will show you a site plan as soon as I can get better with this. So there is the lot itself. The house and the detached or the attached garage is more toward one end, and then there's a long appendage that goes between the Citizens Reservoir and the Geist Reservoir. So what I'm wanting to show you on this particular slide is they are at the very end of Haven Courtway. And Haven Courtway, right into their driveways, is a hammerhead turnaround. The hammerhead that goes into their property is 57 feet deep, and then beyond that is the 16-foot setback that we're seeking to the end of the three-car garage. So in reality, with all the other homes on Haven Courtway, this would be back off the road, off the main road by about 80 feet, as opposed to what normally would be required at 30 feet. The other item is the 16-foot setback. It's off a private drive. Both the house, the main house, is obviously well beyond the required setback. It's only the garage that is in question. So my next item I wanted to show you is they've actually pushed the garage and the house as close to the reservoir as they possibly can and still construct. So we do have a very unique situation where the topography of this particular lot is very unusual. It actually required platting 2 lots in order for them to build their house. But if you can see where the garage is situated, as it gets towards the reservoir, there's really no other way to keep that garage and push it even further back. The 16 feet that we're asking for is the area that lines up with the main house and the covered walkway that connects the 2 structures. In addition, the area in the 16 feet, since it's a required front yard, would be landscaped as if it were a required yard. So not only would it be 80 feet off the main drive, it would be landscaped. It's not an entrance to the garage, it's the very end, so it could easily be landscaped and screened. The staff has recommended that this be recorded. I do have another variance following this that has an additional recommendation, but for right now, I would open it up for questions on the setback variance request.
Members of the board, any questions for Mr. Gilman? Do you want to go ahead with the second request, Mr. Gilman?
Sure. Okay, so in the very same garage structure, you could see it here. It is called garage number 2. Excuse me. The top elevation, you see the front of the garage number 2. On the water side, get down here to this arrow to the lower part. On the water side, the garage is attached to the main house by its foundation and by a covered walkway. So it's actually functioning as part of the main structure, the primary residence. Above the garage, there's about a 1,300 square foot guest quarters. My client is a best-selling author. She travels extensively, and she just had a baby. It's about 4-month-old, and they're looking to, they're interviewing for a nanny at this time. And they also have extended family and guests that they would like to be able to occupy some independent living area as opposed to having to occupy with them in the residence. So the staff has recommended that this second living quarter be open just for family and guests, and that's exactly the intent. There's no intent to ever rent or lease that out. Also, as I mentioned, this was 2 lots intended for 2 separate homes. So asking for a second self-sufficient living quarters as a guest suite is not a stretch or a huge deviation from what was intended by the original plat to put 2 separate homes on these 2 lots. We hope that the board would see the hardship in our variance with our unusual topography, in that we have the garage moved back as much as possible, but there is an additional setback because of our terminus at the very end of Haven Courtway, and it will be landscaped, and we hope the board will see the slight deviation to allow a guest quarters and a main house that are physically connected as one on 2 platted lots that have been replatted into one larger lot. And again, this lot is very long and narrow, has plenty of open space, so the reduction in a required yard should, hopefully that won't be a huge deviation, because there's plenty of opportunity to maintain the open space on this lot well above what the ordinance would require. With that, I'd be happy to answer questions that staff, members of the audience, or the board would have of me.
Thank you, Mr. Gilman. Members of the board, do we have any questions for Mr. Gilman? At this point, I'd ask staff to present, please.
Good evening. For the record, Ross Hillary, City of Fishers, Assistant Director for Planning and Zoning. Let me get to the right slide for you guys. So before you tonight is VA 23-4 and VA 23-5, located at 10745 Haven Cove Way for setback and accessory dwelling unit. The property located at 10746 Haven Cove Way in Springs of Cambridge is located on the south side of Gas Reservoir and the west side of Olea Road. It is currently zoned Marina PUD. The petitioner that you just heard from is David Gilman on behalf of the property owner. They are requesting one development standard variance regarding the front setback and one land use variance regarding 2 dwelling units within a single primary structure. As was mentioned, the subject site went through the platting process in April of 2022 to combine the 2 lots into one that we see here today. And the residential building permit was applied for in January of 2023, which started this process. Here is part of the proposed site plan that shows the primary structure. The red circle shows the front setback proposed at 16 feet from the right-of-way, and the Marina PUD front setback standard is 30 feet, as mentioned by Mr. Gilman earlier. Here is the proposed front elevation. The accessory dwelling unit is proposed where the red circle is, and the space above the second garage. Staff considers this a part of the primary structure because it is connected by the home by a breezeway shown within that kind of odd-shaped area. Per section 5.15 of the UDO, though, 2 unit livings defined as dwelling units in a single primary structure is not permitted within the R2 zoning district, which is the base of this property. This is a site plan of the interior of the second floor of the garage showing the living space. As you can see, it will be entirely self-sufficient with a living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom, making it qualify from a staff perspective as a separate dwelling unit. At this time, we have not received any public comment about this variance. And staff does have no recommendation for the Board of Zoning Appeals for these 2 variances, both for the front setback and no recommendation for the board in regards to the second dwelling unit. With that being said, should the board approve the petition, staff does recommend the following conditions: that the variance is recorded with the property with the county. The second condition is that the accessory dwelling unit would not be rented out for profit. The third condition is that the accessory dwelling unit would have the same address as the existing primary dwelling unit, and the accessory dwelling unit would be used only by the property owners or guest of the property owners. And we've confirmed with the petitioner that they have agreed to those conditions. Staff is happy to answer any questions.
I have a question, Ross.
Yep.
If we're inclined to vote in favor of this, how does the city intend to enforce the accessory dwelling not being rented out for profit and only being used by the property owner?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. We've had conditions like this in the past placed on similar accessory dwelling units, and it typically would be enforced if we start hearing complaints from the neighbors. So we're going to be more reactionary with code enforcement on cases like these, just because we're not going to be around the properties to really see how it's being used, and we'll be more reactionary in that case. But this gives us the ability to go after and enforce those when it's necessary.
Thank you, Megan. Members of the board, do you have any questions for Ross? At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone is here from the public to speak to this petition, please approach the podium, state your name and address. Seeing no members of the public, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Gilman, we can approach this variance request in 2 parts. I think that might be the best way to do that. So we'll take your 16-foot setback first and the accessory dwelling unit second, okay? So members of the board, do we have a motion as to the setback first?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve VA 23-4.
It is 23-4, exactly, yes.
23-4 with conditions that the variance is recorded with the county. And I guess for the setbacks, that would only be for that one.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Secretary?
Mr. Grinslade,
Yes.
Mr. Sylvie,
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson,
Yes.
And Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes, motion passes. We'll take the second part of your request, which is VA 23-5, the accessory dwelling unit. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion on that, that we approve VA 23-5 on the conditions that the variance is recorded with the county. The accessory dwelling unit will not be rented out for profit. The accessory dwelling unit will have the same address as the existing primary dwelling unit, and the accessory dwelling unit will be used only by the property owners or guests of the property owner.
And I have a friendly amendment to that. That is as depicted in the renderings that you provided to us. Is that acceptable?
That's acceptable, yes.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Grinslade.
Yes.
Mr. Sylvie.
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrucci.
Yes, motion passes as well. Thank you, Mr. Gilman.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any new business? All right, staff communication? We're good. At this point, move to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adjourned.